So this is the most important day in the Christian calendar. If this day doesn't happen, there is no Christianity. If this day doesn't happen, we're not here. You woke up late thinking about where you're going to go for brunch. Or maybe it's a nice day, maybe you're going to go play some golf or do something outside, maybe yard work. If this day doesn't happen, there is no church, no Christianity. Because what happened here 2,000 years ago was, over 2,000 years ago, Jesus voluntarily left his place by the right hand of God the Father in heaven. The Son of God was born in Bethlehem. At the time we celebrated Christmas time, he lived his life on earth and then voluntarily allowed himself to be hung on a cross to die for all of humanity. He was paying for all the unloving things that have ever been done. And then, when he was dead, his followers thought, oh my goodness, it's all over. The guy that we have followed for all of these years, for 3 years, we believed in his teachings, we believed in him, it's dead now. They were in despair, hopeless, scared, and hiding out. And then on this morning, 2,000 years ago, Jesus stood up in the grave, took off the grave clothes, the stone was rolled away, and he walked out, went to his followers and said, here, put your hands in the nail holes. And they bowed down and worshiped God. They knew who he was, and they were so transformed, so changed by Jesus, that nothing would silence them. Did you know of the early disciples that Jesus gathered to himself? Only one of them died of old age. Did you know that? Only one, only John. The rest of them were executed for their faith in some horrific ways, but they would not stop telling anyone about Jesus. They're like, you can take my life. Paul was hung upside down on a cross. He's like, he was beheaded. Peter was hung upside down on a cross. He's like, you can hang me any way you want. You will not stop me from telling you that Jesus is who he said he was, and you all need to know about Jesus, and you could not silence them. And these men started, and they changed the world. And because of Jesus. Now, some of you, maybe Easter's just a time when you go to church because family or friends, you're like, well, I'm not sure what I really believe about all this Christianity stuff. And, is he who you're saying he is? How can I know that? Great question. So we're starting a brand new series today, and it's all about this, how Jesus actually changed the world. Brand new series. So it's perfect for you to be here because we are going to, over the next few weeks, explore who Jesus actually was. Because if he was who I say he was, then he should have had a tremendous impact on this world. If he was actually God among us, that's a pretty big deal. That should have had a big impact. And there are people who don't believe that, as you know. There's an associate professor of biology right now at the University of Minnesota who recently put this on his blog. Christianity is the rot that corrupts minds. It's nice to know he's teaching our kids in University of Minnesota, but it is Minnesota, and we expect that from Viking fans. So, it's like, right, okay, right, all right. So, is he right? Maybe he's right. Maybe it is actually rot that's destroying the lives of people today. What if that's true? Well, I don't obviously believe that. Years ago, I read this amazing book by Dr. D. James Kennedy, What If Jesus Had Never Been Born? And since then, there have been 2 more books that have been written about this very subject of how Jesus impacted the world. Fantastic books. And in the books, what they reveal is just how different the world was and how different it is today because of Jesus. And we're going to show you that. And the reality is what you're going to learn is how much we take for granted. How things that we just accept as kind of normal, they were not normal. And it's all because of Jesus. What Jesus has done is so amazing. He's changed the world. And whether you're just beginning your spiritual journey or you've been a Christian for a long time, you, I promise, are going to learn something new and you're going to be challenged. And I have 3 goals. So these are my 3 goals for all of you. First off, I want you to understand exactly how Jesus changed this world. I want you to know. Second, I want your appreciation for Jesus to grow. And then for those of you who follow Jesus, my 3rd goal is that you and I would begin to imitate Jesus and live like he did. So let's start with the understanding thing as we start. And of all the ways in which he changed the world, the one I chose to talk about on Easter is this one. How Jesus changed the way we view human beings and human dignity. So in your program are these notes. Would you please take your notes out and grab a pen? There'll be some things you're going to want to write down as we go through this. And welcome, of course, to those of you watching either on YouTube or now on our website. So the notes should be right below the video. You're welcome to open them up. Let's get started. First, you have to understand how the world used to be. How can I possibly convince you that the world is different because of Jesus if you don't understand how the world used to be? And again, what I'm saying is obviously apparently controversial. There was a man who wrote a different book, and he talked about Christians, and he said this: if the otherwise admirably civilized pagans of Greece and their Roman successors had the wit to laugh Judaism into destitute, which basically means just kind of ignored them, and they'd have faded away. The world, look at this, the world would have been spared the 2,000-year sickness of Christendom. Is he right? That's really what I want you to think about. What if this guy's right? What if the world of the ancient Greeks and Romans, the civilized, beautiful world, was destroyed by Christianity? What if Christians messed the world up? What if Jesus messed the world up, didn't make it better? What if that's true instead? Well, the only way you're going to know if he's right is to know what the ancient world was like. And so I'm going to be sharing a bunch of history with you. So normally I have my message memorized. I did not memorize all this historical stuff. So there's no way. So I'm going to be reading a little more than usual. But I need to show you how the world was when Jesus was born. And you make your own decision. You decide today, did Jesus make it better or worse? You decide. So let's start with Jesus and children. Jesus and children. The impact of Jesus when it comes to children. So let me tell you, as a matter of fact, have you ever heard of one of these? This is called a baby box. You ever heard of this? This is a baby box in Indiana. They typically put these in fire stations or police departments or public buildings like that. Because there's something called the safe haven laws in all 50 states in America. Do you know what safe haven laws are? Any mom just gives birth to a baby can sign their child over at birth anonymously and walk away. So they can simply give them up and they can walk away and there are no consequences to them. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to do that. And so then they've had to create these things called baby boxes where you can go and you don't have to sign anyone, you don't have to see anyone. You walk up and you put the baby in the box and you walk away because the boxes are heated. They are set to an alarm so that if someone puts the baby in there, it triggers an alarm and the professionals can come and take the child. Now, the reason I read about this is 2 weeks ago, I think it was the Milwaukee State Journal I was reading about this. There's a push in Wisconsin now to get baby boxes because even though we have these safe haven laws, too many things are happening like what just happened in Wisconsin where police authorities were called to this abandoned car because there was a bag in the back. They opened up the bag and there was a baby inside. And they tried to resuscitate the baby and save the baby's life, but it was too late. And those things happen all the time. So we're trying to give it even a safer place where you can anonymously say, just let go of the baby without the baby having to die. But the reality is there are babies dying in our country. So are you okay with that? Does that bother you at all? The fact that it bothers you is only because of Jesus. The fact that it bothers you at all, at any level, is only because of Jesus, because 2,000 years ago, it bothered nobody. You want to know what the world was like 2,000 years ago? This is what it was like 2,000 years ago. In the ancient world, children, they didn't typically get named until 8 days after their birth. Do you know why? Because they didn't know if they were going to keep the child. They didn't know if the child would survive. Up until the 8th day, there was a chance that the infant would simply be killed or left to die by a practice called exposure. This was the world that Jesus was born into, the civilized world of the Greeks and Romans. If the child was born deformed, or the family was too poor to afford another child, or if it was not the right gender, a girl, if it was a girl, there were special places in most of the communities, typically by a wall somewhere, where the newborn baby the parents could walk up, set the baby down, and walk away. And they would be left out, exposed to die. And nobody cared. That's simply how it was done. That's simply how it was done. The head of the household had the legal right to decide the life or death of every other member of the family. As a matter of fact, one of the ancients, a man named Plutarch, wrote that up until the time the child was named, it's more like a plant than a human. Is that how we think of it? More like a plant. Abandoned children were often, if they didn't have a place like this, they would just leave them at the dump. Can you imagine walking by the dump and hearing the sounds of babies crying? That was their world. That was the admirable world of the ancient Greeks and Romans before Jesus screwed it up. That was their world. Babies that were disabled or appeared weak were often disposed of quickly by drowning. There was an ancient Roman law that actually said that a boy who was strikingly deformed had to be disposed of quickly. The Roman writer Seneca said, "We drown children at birth who are weakly and abnormal." This was the ancient world of the Greeks and the Romans, this noble, admirable society. To make matters worse, those children who actually outlived infancy, which was about 2/3 of those who were born, were the property of their dad, and he could kill them at his whim. Only about half of the children born lived to the age of 8, in part because of infanticide. So we're not just talking about abandoning babies, the dad could simply kill the child at any age, because he had the right to do that. Infanticide was not only legal, it was sometimes applauded. It was commonly held in Rome that killing one of your own children could be an act of beauty. Well, there are days, right? We all understand that, right? Parents. This was the noble and beautiful world of the ancient Greeks and Romans at the day Jesus was born. When Jesus walked the earth, this was how it was. Violence towards children was tolerated, especially towards slave children. Especially towards slave children. Slave children were obviously frequently sexually abused. There was a book written called The Economics of Prostitution in Rome. And it said that what slave owners often did to make a little money on the side is when one of their slaves had a child, they would take the child and they would sell it to the brothel. And the girls and boys would be there being abused every day until their looks faded and no one would pay them anymore, or until the boys' beard sprouted, and then they would take them back and they would live in slaves in the house until the day they died in that noble, ancient, beautiful world that Jesus screwed up. This is how it used to be. So the question is, when did things change? Aren't you glad that when you go to the dump, you don't hear the sounds of babies? When did things change? There's a historian named O.M. Bakke who wrote a book called When Children Became People. He said that Christians thought we believed that all people have souls, and it had an enormous impact on the way children started to be treated. So the question is, where did we get that concept that children have souls? Well, because our Savior, Jesus, said this. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a little child to him, placed the child among them. "Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like this little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." And Christians paid attention to what Jesus said. His ideas changed them. And so his followers began to pay attention to what Jesus said and start to change their behavior. Early on, Christians began to establish rules. By the 2nd century, if you were a Christian attending a church and you were alive, just a short time after Jesus, they started making rules for anyone who started attending the church. And they had rules about not abandoning your babies when they were born and not killing your children. Rules to us that seem outrageous. But at the time, they were outrageous. There's a letter that has survived from the 2nd century. It was called the letter to Diogenes. The writer was talking about these crazy Christians. He said, they marry, they have children, but they don't destroy the offspring. Isn't that crazy? Who does that? It was a radical idea. It was unheard of in that day and age. What we accept and take for granted, this is just how it is, was absolutely unheard of when it started, and Christians started it because they followed the teachings of Jesus. G.K. Chesterton, another author, said that the elevation of dignity of childhood would have made no sense to the ancient world because Zeus and Apollo did not say that all human beings are valued equally. They didn't believe that. Jesus did. Eventually, the Christians were able to get the practice of exposure stopped. In ancient Rome, many of the Christians, as they formed churches, started to go to the dumps and pick up the babies and bring them in and raise them in the church. Foundling homes, orphanages, nursery homes were started to house all the children that were being abandoned. And that all went back to Jesus. That all went back to Jesus. Because he was the one who said, let the little children come to me. And the Christians took that serious and said, we're going to do this. Eventually, Christian emperors, just a few hundred years after Jesus' death and resurrection, finally outlawed the practice of both exposing your children and killing your children. And things that we just take for granted, that are just part of our society, did not exist until Jesus. Isn't that amazing? That's just one aspect of what he did with children. There's so much more to talk about. How about what he did in the world of slavery? Dignity to slaves. If you know your history, you know that about half of the Roman Empire were slaves. Half. 3/4 of the population of Athens were slaves. And if you know anything about your history, you know also that slaves, their lives did not belong to them. They could be ended at any moment and nobody cared. You could kill as many slaves as you wanted if you were the owner, and it didn't matter. If you weren't the owner, all you do is pay for the damaged property because they were things, not people. Did you know in Athens, this is amazing, in Athens, you could not admit the testimony of a slave into a courtroom until after they had been tortured. So if they hadn't tortured them, their testimony wasn't admissible in a court of law. Isn't this amazing? This is the world that Jesus was born into. Did you also know that in Roman society, that if the head of the household was murdered, every slave in the household was put to death? There's a story from history of a Roman named Pandanius Secundus, who was murdered in his household, and so they took every one of his 400 slaves and killed them all. And there was no outrage. Nobody was saying, oh, what a terrible thing, like some of you are sitting here thinking, this is crazy. That was the world, and it was common, and it was accepted practice. So when did this begin to change? Listen, you know this. Ideas change the world, right? Ideas change the world. And Jesus put ideas about the dignity and value of every single human being in the hearts and minds of his followers. And there's a tiny little book in your Bible in the New Testament called Philemon. Chances are you probably never even read it. It's a really short little book. Paul, the follower of Jesus, wrote this tiny little book. Philemon was a wealthy man in his day. He owned slaves. And one day, one of his slaves named Onesimus ran away. And while Onesimus was off doing what he did, he ran into the Apostle Paul. And Paul told him about Jesus. And Onesimus became a follower of Jesus, became a Christian. And then in the book, in this tiny little one-chapter book that Paul wrote, he wrote back to the master, Philemon, and he said this: perhaps the reason Onesimus, your slave, was separated from you for a little while was that you might have him back forever. Look at this. No longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. Do you have any idea how revolutionary those words were 2,000 years ago? To think of a slave as your own brother? Nobody was saying this. It began to change the ancient world because Christians began to live this out. Have you ever heard of a ceremony called foot washing? You ever heard of this? You know what this is about? So Jesus did this. On the night he was betrayed, he gathered his disciples. He put them out in front of him. He put on a serving towel. He got down on his knees with a basin of water. And again, 2,000 years ago, feet were disgusting. You know, he had open sandals, and you were walking on roads where all the animals were walking, so they were disgusting. As a matter of fact, only the lowest of the household servants could be forced to wash someone's feet because it was such an awful task. And here's Jesus, the master of them all, on his knees with a towel, washing the feet of his own disciples. And then he said, what you've seen from me, I want you to do for others. And the early church used to do this. The early church used to have foot washing ceremonies. Did you know that? So if we were Christians 2,000 years ago and we were part of the early church getting started, you'd have walked in here this morning, you'd had open-toed shoes on, your feet would have been disgusting, and we would have gotten down on our knees and someone would have washed your feet when you came in. It was an amazing act of service. And what took place in that early church was that masters got on their knees and began to wash the feet of the slaves who were Christians that came into the building to worship God. And it began to change everything. Because Paul also wrote this. He said, hey, in Jesus, there's no longer Jew or Gentile. There's no longer slave or free. There's no longer male or female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. And that idea began to change the world. And eventually Christians began to really wake up and say, we can't live in a world where slavery is tolerated. And so there was this man. You ever heard of him from your history books? You remember this? William Wilberforce. 1700s, he lived in England. He was part of their government called the Parliament. And he was a strong believer in Jesus. And as he read his Bible, he became more and more convinced. At that time, you know anything about your history, the British Empire would go out, conquer nations, and make everybody slaves. And so he was like, I cannot work at a government, I can't live in a country where slavery is tolerated. And he gathered a group of other Christians who were serving in the Parliament, and they spent the next 40 years of their life fighting against the evil and injustice of slavery, against powerful people. I mean, they're wealthy. Their livelihood depended on slavery. He fought and fought despite all the opposition, and finally, after 40 years, in 1833, right before he died, Parliament passed a law, and on that day, 700,000 slaves were set free worldwide because a Christian said, my God says they are just as valuable as I am. And they would not stop. Even in our own country, we fought a pretty bloody civil war to try and end the evil of slavery. What was really interesting, in 1835, 2/3 of the members of the Abolition Society, the group that was trying to stamp out slavery in our country, 2/3 of them were pastors. Were standing in front of their churches every day saying, we can't be okay with this. Their skin color does not make them less than us. Their skin color doesn't make them any different than us. 2/3. Have you ever heard that in your history classes? 2/3. The Quakers ran so much of the Underground Railroad to get people out of slavery. Their Christian faith said, we can't tolerate this. We have to help people. Even today, there are still organizations fighting the sex slave industry in the world. There are more slaves today than any other time. We're not free with slavery's not over. There are more slaves today than ever before. I mean, have you noticed? There's starting to be stories even locally. Madison, Milwaukee, Eau Claire, Chicago, Minneapolis, of girls being rescued out of sex slave industry right in our own backyard. And these Christian organizations, which we've partnered with Free the Girls, and we've done this before to help rescue people from slavery, we will not stop. We will always do this because we won't be in a world where our God says those people are every bit as valuable as you are. And we won't stop because Jesus changed the world. His teachings led to the freedom of so many slaves. And it's still just as important today. I could go on and on. Jesus brought dignity to the sick. Do you know what it used to be like? If you were poor and sick, you had no hope. You had no options. In the ancient world, if you got sick, you had no money, there was nothing you could do. You were simply going to die. Did you know, some of you who really like history will know this detail. In AD 165, there was a worldwide epidemic that wiped out 1/3 to 1/4 of the entire population. Could you imagine if by the end of the year, 1/3 to 1/4 of everyone in our community was dead? Can you imagine what that does? They think it was smallpox. And the Emperor Marcus Aurelius actually died from it. And then not even 100 years later, there was a second one, AD 250. It wiped out about 1/3 of the cities in the entire Roman Empire. One Greek historian said these people died with no one to look after them. Indeed, there were many houses in which all the inhabitants perished through the lack of any intention or care. Why? And partly because the Greek and Roman gods they worshipped said, you have no obligation to care for anyone around you. You have no obligation. That was just the world that they lived in. Each man did what was best for himself. But did you know this? Historically, there was a small group of people who followed Jesus, who when those epidemics hit, they didn't walk away from the sick and dying. They went into the homes of the sick and dying to care for them. There's a historical record from that time from a writer named Dionysius who wrote about what happened during those plagues. Look what he said about Christians. Heedless of the danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ, and with them departed this life serenely happy. For they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting their pains. Isn't that amazing? Everyone ran away, they ran in. Because they said, we're not going to let these people die alone. We're going to care for them. Why would they do that? Well, because the God that we worship, the one that we are named after as Christians, said that every time you serve another human being, no matter what you do, you serve me. And so he said, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat, because when we fed somebody who was hungry on earth, we were feeding Jesus. And I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. And when I was sick, you looked after me. And they said, oh my goodness, these people are sick, and we can treat them just like they are Jesus. And they walked in when everyone else walked out, and they laid down their lives to care for them. This is what they did. Eventually, Christians became so serious about this that they actually made this rule. Wherever there's going to be a major church, there has to be a hospice, a place where the sick and the poor can be cared for. You ever wonder why so many hospitals have religious names attached to them? It's because Christians said, we are not just here to talk about the soul, we're here to talk about the body too. And just like our master touched the lepers and healed the sick and told us to care for the sick, we will do the same thing too. This was not common. It was not acceptable. It wasn't. If you're grateful for hospitals today, that was not pre-Jesus. That was not pre-Jesus. Matter of fact, even today, around the globe, where there is no Christian influence as a dominant influence, you don't see the sick being cared for, and you don't see dignity in life. When I was 17 years old, I went and served as a missionary in India for the summer in 1988. I was so surprised by so many of the aspects. One of the things that I think about to this day was there were hospitals in New Delhi. I was in the capital city. Millions and millions of people live there. There are hospitals. One day I was walking by, and we were going to teach this club at this one school, and every day we had to walk by this major hospital. The most unbelievable sight was to see the sidewalks completely lined with sick people outside the hospital who have no money and no resources and no ability to pay for it. Because their religious system is something called karma. Have you heard of this? Karma, it's the idea that you get what you deserve. It was against their religious values to help those people because they believed that they were in that position because they'd done something bad in a previous life, and so they were here suffering, dying on a sidewalk because they deserved to be. And if you help them, you know what you did? In the next life, they have to suffer again. So you literally walk around. Remember, I'll never forget this one guy. He was sitting on this little board that had wheels on it. His foot was bigger than my waist. It was wrapped loosely in bandages. I had no idea what it was, obviously. And he pulled himself along on the sidewalk after us, just begging for money. And the sidewalks were outside the hospital were just lined with people like this, and there was no obligation and no guilt about not helping, because why do you need to help? They're getting what they deserve. It's in Jesus that the world changed. It's in Jesus that we say, no. When we serve that person, we're serving Jesus himself. So let's put up a hospital, and let's start organizations called the Red Cross, and let's go serve in the name of Jesus. The wounded and the sick and the dying. This is part of what he did. There's so much more. I just don't have time to tell you, but I told you at the beginning, I want three things. Remember? I want you to understand the impact Jesus has had on this world. So I'm asking you this question. Did Jesus screw it up, or did he make it better? You want to go back to that world of the noble Greeks and Romans? You're like, man, I wish we could do that. He made it so much better. His ideas have changed this world that we live in ways that we just take for granted. I hope you appreciate that more, but like I said, I'm not even hiding it. This is what I want. I want you and I, if you say you follow Jesus, to imitate the compassion of Jesus. That's what I'm after. Imitate the compassion of Jesus. Everywhere in the world, where the true teaching of Jesus comes, there's a change in the value and the dignity of human life. In 1844, there was a man named H.L. Hastings who went and traveled to the Fiji Islands for business. When he walked on the islands, he was stunned by what he saw. Human life was cheap. You literally could buy a human being for $7 in 1844 in the Fiji Islands. He said it was $7 or one musket, and you could buy a human. He was just appalled by what he saw. He was gone for years and years and years, and he came back at a significantly later time, and he was stunned by the transformation that happened in the Fiji Islands. Now, all of a sudden, you couldn't buy a human being for $7 million. And when he asked why, what he discovered is that there were, in that time period, missionaries had come to the Fiji Islands, and they'd started over 1,200 churches. And as the teachings of Jesus invaded the society, human life and dignity was restored. And Christians began to say, no, this isn't okay. It doesn't matter where they were born, what income level they're at. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their skin color is. They are just as valuable as us. The teachings of Jesus still change the world today. So, two things if we're going to imitate what Jesus did and bring his values into this world. First, you and I have to learn to think about people the way Jesus thought about people. We have to learn this. We think about people the way Jesus thinks about people. So how did he think about people? Well, God, he lived this verse out. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, both male and female. He created them. And every human being you have ever met, ever in your life, is created in the image of God. Now, this is not how the ancient world thought about him. Ever heard of Aristotle? Kind of a big figure from that time. He literally said, from the hour of their birth, some people are marked out for slavery and others to rule. So some people are really valuable and some are just things that you can dispose of any way you want. That was the thinking of the ancient world until Jesus, who brought his truth into the world, that said, no. Every human is created in the image of God, therefore every human is valuable and every human is worthwhile. As a matter of fact, there was a Yale professor who said, when did this begin to change? And this Yale professor pointed out, it was the teachings of Scripture clarified and made available to all the world through Jesus, that every human being is made in the image of God and loved by God, and that's what changed the world. So, do you see the image of God? Do you see a man created in the image of God? What do you see? See, the key is to lock into our minds this single truth. I remind myself that every person I ever see and ever will see is a masterpiece of God, created in the image of God, one of a kind. You will never, ever, ever lay eyes on a human being that isn't created in the image of God and therefore infinitely valuable and infinitely worthwhile, regardless of what they look like or I've used this for years. If you've heard me teach before, you know that I learned this probably about 10 or 12 years ago. And I've taught this many times. I've said, you can't control your first thought, right? You can't control the first thought when you meet somebody. Can't. But you are totally in control of the second thought. So years and years ago, I learned this. And I've used it, I don't even know how many hundreds of times since then. I used it just a week ago. I was in this place, and I'm just waiting in line, and this person came up next to me, and the first thing you noticed was the smell. First thing you notice. It's like, And I turned and looked at this person. You could tell by their clothes, they obviously didn't have much. They were anxious. I mean, like jittery, like looking around like they thought they were about to be attacked at any moment. And when they looked toward me, there was a growth on their face, and I immediately thought, I wonder how much teasing and abuse they've suffered because of that all their life. Now, I have no control over the first thought in my head, none. But I know, and I am totally in control of the second thought in my head. And the second thought in my head as I looked at this woman standing next to me and smelled this woman standing next to me was, this woman was created by God himself for a special purpose here on earth. She's so loved by him and so valuable to him that if she'd have been the only person on earth 2,000 years ago, Jesus still would have come and died for her because he loves her that much. Do you know what it does to your attitude when you look at people this way? Is this how you look at the people who've been really, really cruel to you in your life? Is that how you look at them? Oh, created by God in the image of God. The person who calls you their enemy today? The people who've treated you the worst in life? We learn to treat and we learn to view everyone the way Jesus did because it naturally leads to this. Then we begin to treat people the way Jesus did. Once you see them the way Jesus did, you will begin to treat them the way that Jesus did. And make no mistake about it, Christianity is about action. If you think it's about coming and sitting in a pew once in a while, you do not understand Christianity and you do not understand Jesus. Look at the action that he says. I could put so many verses up from the Bible. It says, here's what you need to do. You need to learn to do right. You need to seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. And when this verse was written thousands of years ago, those were the most vulnerable people in this society. The widows, they had nobody, no government support, no family to take care of them. The fatherless, orphans, these were the people who were most vulnerable. He said, if you follow me, then you fight for them. You fight for the people in this world who cannot fight for themselves, the people that nobody else wants to be around, nobody else wants to see. This is what you do. And if you come to Penn, you will hear us talk about this constantly. We will talk about how we fight to help the homeless or feed the hungry or care for the world's poor or rescue girls who are trapped in the sex slave industry today because they are created in the image of God and they're every bit as valuable as we are. And we give and we serve and we sacrifice to show them that. I read an amazing story prepping this message that really, really challenged me when I read it. There's an author who had written a book, and he said when he was young, his mom and his dad loved the Houston Astros baseball team. And they lived close enough that he would regularly take him to the baseball, to the stadium to watch Houston Astros play. He said, my dad wasn't very rich. So we could only afford the cheapest seats way out in the upper deck of the outfield. So like you're in the stadium, but you are as far away from the action as you can get. You know, he said the other people that would buy those tickets were typically the people who wanted to save the rest of their money for beer. So he said what would happen in the stadium as the game went on is pretty soon the floor would be covered with beer, you'd be covered with beer, and fights would be breaking out all over the place. And he said at least we got to see the Astros. So we went to a lot of Astro games like this. And he said there was one guy who was always there. He literally had a nickname. He was known in the Astro Stadium. His nickname was Batty Bob. Batty Bob. Every game he came to, he would wear a huge rainbow wig. Every game. He'd be drunk with just in a few innings. He'd be causing all kinds of conflict. And he said, as a boy, I remember one time, my dad left me and went up to sit by Batty Bob during the game. So my dad spent the whole game talking to Batty Bob. Then after the game was over, he walked him down to the parking lot and told me that he was going to bring Batty Bob home to be with us. Now, he said, I was a little child. He said, I was so confused because this is one of the bad people. And when we got home, my dad took me aside and he explained to me how God loved Bob. And I can remember thinking, really? I mean, he loves him? Really? My dad let him stay with us for a few days to get back on his feet. He said, as a child, that's when I started to realize that God does not despise those people. He dearly loves them for the same reason he dearly loves me. Is that how you view and treat the people around you? The people who vote differently than you vote? The people who work in different places where you work or look different than you do? If you're a follower of Jesus, I hope you see how much our God has changed the world. This is just 1 week. First week, tip of the iceberg. God has changed the world that we live in. And like I said, I hope you understand and appreciate what he's done. But the reality is, if you follow Jesus, it's our job to imitate him. We have to be like him. So my question to you, 2 questions. Do you think about the people around you the way Jesus did? Do you see them as created in the image of God, worthy of dignity? And then the follow-up, of course, is do you treat them the way you should be treating them? Because they are created in the image of God. Those of you just exploring your faith, boy, I hope you've heard this one thing really clearly. You are so important to God just as you are. Just as you are. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. Because the truth is, God is crazy in love with you. There's never a moment of your life where he isn't thinking about you. He loved you so much that 2,000 years ago, he sent his one and only Son into this world to pay on a cross for all that we've done that's wrong. So that any human, anywhere, anytime, who would hear this amazing gift of Jesus that was offered, who would turn and put their faith in Jesus, could be completely forgiven and be brought into a relationship with the God of love. So maybe this is the first time this has really made sense to you. Some of you have been looking for answers in so many places. You've chased money and accomplishments, and you know that it's just never enough. What your soul is crying out for is a real relationship with God. And if you will let him today, he will come and make his home inside of you and forgive you and begin his work to work with you in your life. With your head bowed, if you want this gift, all you have to say is, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I've heard today that you died for me. And with the faith that I have, I'm coming to you. I'm asking you to forgive me and come and make your home inside of me. I'm turning to you today in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, as we finish, can I ask you all to take this little card out of your program? And I ask you to do it every week, so regular attenders, just humor me and take it out. You don't have to fill it all in every week, but just take a moment and jot it down. Maybe some of you today, you prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you. You see this box right here? Just check the box. Let us know what you did. We'll send you something nice in the mail as a follow-up. And then maybe you recommitted your life, or you have a prayer request or something you want to say to us. What you do is just take a moment and fill this out and then drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes back by the doors where you came in. Thanks so much for coming today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Easter. And don't forget, there are books on the back table that you can pick up for free on your way out. So thanks for coming.